Okay, let's unpack this. Minds Biosciences. The ticker is DRUG. Oh, and wow, back in late 2024, this stock just went absolutely ballistic.
Yeah, almost 1,500% in a really short time. Just wild.
Totally. You can just imagine the buzz around it. But fast forward to now, April 17th, 2025, and the price is, well, it's sitting around $32.01.
Quite a drop from that peak.
Exactly. Especially when you think it hit a low of just $93 in the last year. So what drives that kind of massive swing?
Well, that level of volatility, it screams high stakes. And in biotech, that usually means, incredible potential mixed with some very real risks. Failure is always a possibility.
Precisely. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. You, our listener, pointed us to a recent research report. It's dated April 18th, 2025, all about Bright Minds.
Right.
And our mission here is really to cut through all that noise, pull out the key insights for you, give you a solid handle on what this company does, where it might be going, without getting bogged down in overly technical stuff.
Exactly. And looking closely at this report, we can really get under the hood, We'll explore their core business. What problems are they actually trying to solve?
Right.
We'll look at the management team, their financial health, how the market sees them, who owns the stock, and, crucially, the risks and potential rewards. It's kind of your shortcut to the key questions.
Absolutely. And just so everyone's clear, everything we're discussing today comes straight from that Minds Biosciences Deep Research Report dated April 18th, 2025.
Yep, that's our source material.
You can find a link to it and other sources down in the description. So let's jump in. First up, Chapter 1, Business Understanding. What does Bright Minds actually do?
Okay, so Bright Minds is what's called a clinical stage biotech. That means they're developing new drugs, but they don't have any products on the market yet, no revenue from sales. Their focus is on novel treatments for CNS disorders, central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord stuff, particularly tough conditions like refractory epilepsy.
The kind that doesn't respond well to current treatments.
Exactly, and treatment-resistant depression. Because they're pre-revenue, they rely completely on financing from investors. They actually just secured $35 million in a private placement back in November 2024.
Okay, that's significant funding.
It is. They trade under DRUG on NASDAQ and the Canadian Securities Exchange, and they're based in New York.
So tackling really difficult conditions deep in the drug development game, what are their key products then? What's in the pipeline?
Their lead candidate, the one getting the most attention right now, is BMB-101. It's a pretty interesting molecule. It's designed to be highly selective for a specific serotonin receptor, 5-HT2C.
And that selectivity is important because...
Right, so think of serotonin receptors like a family. Some older drugs hit multiple family members, causing unwanted side effects. BMB-101 aims specifically for 5-HT2C, with minimal effect on 5-HT2A and, crucially, 5-HT2B.
5-HT2B. That's the one linked to heart issues like with fenfluramine, wasn't it?
Precisely. So avoiding that is key for safety, especially for drugs that might be taken long-term. Selectivity here is all about getting the benefit without that dangerous off-target stuff.
Makes sense. Precision targeting. What else is special about BMB-101?
They're also using something called biased agonism. It's a bit technical, but think of the receptor like a switch activating different pathways in the cell.
Yeah.
A standard drug might flip the switch and activate everything a bit. A biased agonist tries to preferentially flip it towards one specific pathway here. It's the GQ protein pathway over another called beta-arrestin.
And the hope is?
The hope is that this more targeted activation could lead to better long-term effectiveness and maybe reduce the chance of the drug losing its punch over time, which is a big deal for chronic conditions like epilepsy.
Yeah, tolerance issues.
Exactly. So BMB-101 is now in a phase 2 trial called Breakthrough, started late 2024. It's looking at adults with absence epilepsy and developmental epileptic encephalopathies, or DEEs, often very hard to treat.
And when might we see results from that?
The report says they anticipate the initial data readout around mid-2025. So, yeah, a really important milestone coming up.
Mid-2025. Definitely one to watch. What did the earlier phase 1 studies show?
Phase 1, done in healthy volunteers, showed it was safe and generally well-tolerated at the doses they tested. Importantly, they also saw signs biomarkers that the drug was actually engaging its target in the brain.
Okay, so promising early signs.
Yes. And beyond this current trial, they're thinking about BMB-101 for other things, too. Dravet syndrome, Lennox-Gastaut, even opioid use disorder, and some types of psychosis.
Wow, that's a broad range of possibilities. What else is in their pipeline? Anything else close?
Well, close is relative in biotech. They have BMB-201. It's described as a non-hallucinogenic psychoplastogen. It hits 5-HT2A and 2C, but again, tries to avoid 2B.
Okay, and that's for?
Preclinical development for treatment-resistant depression and chronic pain. Interestingly, the report notes that in animal models of pain, it showed efficacy similar to morphine.
Comparable to morphine, that's notable.
It is. Then there's BMB-202, which they call a next-gen psychedelic. It's a selective 5-HT2A agonist designed with a fast-on, fast-off profile quick effect. Doesn't linger too long.
Potential uses.
Also preclinical for depression, anxiety, PTSD. The company had previously suggested a phase 1 start in late 2023, but this report doesn't update that status, so that's a bit unclear right now.
Somebody keep an eye on that.
Definitely. And they have other, even earlier stage programs, 5-HT2C for obesity, another targeting both 5-HT2A and 2C.
Got it. So a pipeline with several shots on goal, but BMB-101 is clearly the main event for now, especially with that phase 2 data coming. How do they fit into the bigger pharma market picture?
They're definitely a small cap player, market cap around $225 million, clinical stage, no revenue yet. They're competing in the huge, very crowded CNS market.
And their main selling point is?
It really comes down to these next-generation serotonin agonists. They emphasize their own chemistry platform, how they design the molecules, and again, that's selectivity, especially avoiding 5-HT2B. The goal is safer, more effective drugs for long-term use in severe CNS disorders.
Okay, let's quickly recap them. What do they do? How do they make money?
Right. They develop novel drugs for serious brain conditions, focusing on selective serotonin targets. They don't make money from sales yet. They're funded entirely by investors.
And that shift to clinical trials is key.
Absolutely. It ramps up the costs and the risks significantly. Their focus on selective serotonin agonism could be a huge win if BMB-101 works.
But a major blow if it doesn't.
Precisely. And they do have competition. Existing drugs like fenfluramine are used for some epilepsies, and other companies like Longboard Pharmaceuticals are also working on selective 5-HT2C drugs that need to show a clear advantage.
Okay, solid understanding of the business. Let's pivot to Chapter 2, management evaluation. Who's steering the ship here?
Yeah, leadership is absolutely critical in biotech, maybe more so than in other sectors, because so much depends on their expertise and strategic calls. The CEO is Ian McDonald, also co-founder.
Background.
Entrepreneurial, some investment banking experience involved in raising capital. He owns a significant chunk of stock himself, which can be good for alignment.
But the stock's been volatile under his leadership, as we noted.
True. A really key hire, though, was Stephen Collins as Chief Medical Officer, who joined in January 2025. That was big.
Why so significant?
He brings deep CNS drug development experience, former CEO roles at CNS Biotechs, senior positions at big players like J&J and Abbott, involved with epilepsy drugs there. His joining really bolsters their clinical capabilities as they head into these crucial trials.
Yeah, sounds like exactly the kind of experience they need right now. What about the financial side?
The CFO is Ryan Chung. He's a CPA, managing partner at an accounting firm, has experience auditing and consulting for public and private companies.
Anything else noteworthy there?
Well, the report mentions a company where he was previously CFO had a temporary cease trade order back in 2019 for delayed filings, but it was revoked. His 2023 salary was reported at $120,000.
Okay. And other key roles.
Alex Vasilkovich is COO and Senior Scientific Officer, scientific background, biotech startup experience, often a key contact. And Jan Porlev Peterson is Chief Science Officer and a director. Huge experience over 25 years in neuroscience R&D at Lundbeck, co-founded Acadia Pharmaceuticals.
Acadia, that's a successful CNS company.
Very much so. He was interim CSO first, now permanent. So serious scientific leadership there, too.
It seems like a team with real depth, especially on the science and clinical side with Collins and Peterson. What about the board?
The board also looks pretty solid. Names mentioned include Jeremy Freisuk, Nils Bottler, David Weiner, who has specific psychedelics experience relevant to their earlier pipeline, Doug Williamson, formerly head of R&D at Lundbeck, Emer Leahy, CEO of Psychogenics, a preclinical CNS specialist, so quite diverse expertise.
Okay. How have they handled challenge any major crises mentioned?
The report doesn't detail big crises, but successfully landing that $35 million financing late last year was definitely a major positive step.
Right, keeping the lights on and the trials funded.
Exactly. They also addressed some earlier NASDAQ notices about independent directors and minimum price, showing they respond to compliance issues.
In communication, are they transparent with investors?
Seems pretty standard for a public company. press releases, investor section on the website, SEC and Canadian filings. They have a formal disclosure policy. Looks like typical practice.
Ethical reputation. Anything stand out?
Nothing major flagged in the report regarding Bright Minds itself. They seem careful to distinguish their clinical work from recreational psychedelics, focus on trial ethics. That past issue with the CFO's former company seems historical and unrelated to Bright Minds' current operations.
So boiling it down, is this management team honest, capable, and shareholder-focused?
Well, based on the report, honesty seems aligned with standard transparency, capability. The team, especially with the recent hires like Collins, brings very relevant and deep experience for this clinical stage.
And shareholder focus.
High insider ownership, particularly the CEO, suggests this alignment. But you always have the caveat of future dilution risk with financing needs in biotech. Still, strengthening the team for the clinical push looks like a positive sign for shareholders.
All right, now let's talk capital allocation still in Chapter 2. Where's the money actually going?
Overwhelmingly to R&D. Simple as that. In fiscal 2023, it was around $5 million. That was actually down a bit from fiscal 22, apparently due to completing some earlier activities.
And that R&D spend is focused on?
Mainly preclinical work and, critically, funding that big phase 2 trial for BMB 101.
Any M&A, buybacks, dividends?
Nope. No M&A initiated by them, no buybacks, no dividends, and no plans for any. That's very typical for a clinical stage biotech. Every dollar goes back into the pipeline.
So metrics like return on invested capital are meaningless right now?
Pretty much. No revenue, negative income. You can't calculate a meaningful ROIC yet.
Okay, so the key question for listeners, are they using capital effectively to build potential future value?
Ultimately, that hinges entirely on whether the clinical trials succeed. That $35 million raise was absolutely vital to get them to the BMB 101 phase 2 data point.
But the pricing of that raise, below the peak, highlights the challenge, doesn't it?
It does. It shows the dilution risk is real, even after a stock surge. However, the fact that specialist healthcare funds participated heavily in that placement is a strong endorsement. The real verdict on capital allocation comes with the trial results.
Makes sense. It's all about executing the science.
Yeah.
Let's move to Chapter 3, financial health. What do the key metrics tell us?
Okay, financials. As we said, price around $32.01 as of April 17th, 2025. Market cap, roughly $233 million. PE ratio, negative, not useful.
No earns yet.
Right, no revenue either, so profit margins aren't applicable. Debt to equity is low, around 0.32x. They rely on equity, not much debt.
Free cash flow.
Consistently negative, expected given the heavy R&D spend. Price to book is volatile, was around 5.5x, recently much higher at the peak. But book value isn't usually a great measure for biotech value. The pipeline is the key asset.
The report had some tables summarizing this, right? Key takeaways.
Yeah, Table 1 really shows that wild stock ride the huge 52-week range, big year-over-year gain despite the recent pullback. Table 2 on key metrics hammers home the pre-revenue, negative earnings, negative cash flow status.
But it also highlights
low debt, but most importantly, the estimated cash position and that runway, stretching into 2026 thanks to the financing. Those are the critical numbers right now.
So are they profitable with a strong balance sheet?
Profitable? No, definitely not. That's normal for their stage. Strong balance sheet. In terms of low debt, yes, relatively. But financial stability for them is all about that cash runway.
How long can they keep the R&D engine running?
Exactly. The $35 million was crucial to get them past the upcoming phase 2 data, but they will need more cash down the road. That means more dilution risk.
And the stock volatility makes future fundraising trickier.
It can, yeah. That November raise happening after the surge but at a lower price really illustrates that challenge. Raising money isn't always easy, even when there's excitement.
Okay, that brings us to the halfway point. We've covered the business, the management, the financials, a company with a novel approach, stronger team, funded through a key milestone, but definite risks.
Absolutely. The potential is there, but the hurdles are high.
When we come back, we'll look at market sentiment, who owns the stock, and dig into the risks, including those potential tariffs. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Bright Minds Biosciences. We've looked at the what, who, and how much. Now, Chapter 4, market sentiment. What's the general vibe around this stock?
Well, speculative and volatile are probably the key words here. That massive price swing we talked about earlier is Exhibit A.
Right. What drove that initial spike, do we think?
The report suggests a few things possibly played a role. M&A activity around Longboard Pharma, which has a similar drug target, might have created some buzz.
Ah, the read-across effect. Yeah. And potentially a short squeeze. Given the limited public float we'll discuss later, the pullback since then, likely profit-taking, maybe a reality check about the long timelines and risks involved in drug development.
So the market's a bit divided.
Seems like it. You've got long-term believers in the science, and then others who are more cautious about the risks and the valuation right now. It's definitely not a stock for the faint of heart.
What are the professional analysts saying? Any price targets out there?
Coverage seems a bit thin, but the analysts who do cover it are generally positive, though with caveats. Piper Sandler has an overlap rating, 93 thriller target. Robert W. Baird has outperform, $75 target. But Baird specifically ties that target to positive phase 2 data, so it's very much contingent on that mid-2025 readout. Public.com data shows an average target around $84.
Important to remember targets can change, though.
Absolutely, and past targets were much lower. These reflect recent optimism, largely pinned on BMB 101's potential.
How has recent news likely impacted sentiment?
Several positive things probably helped. Starting the phase 2 trial for BMB 101 was key. The collaboration with Firefly Neuroscience for EEG analysis in that trial adds a layer of sophistication.
Okay.
Positive preclinical data for BMB 201 in pain models. Hiring the experienced CMO, Stephen Collins, that crucial $35 million financing.
All potentially boosting confidence.
Right. But on the other hand, the fact that the financing was priced significantly below the recent stock high probably tempered some of that enthusiasm. It's a reminder of the ongoing need for cash and dilution risks.
Got it. A mixed bag of signals influencing a volatile stock. Let's move to Chapter 5, ownership. Who actually holds the shares?
This is interesting. Institutional ownership is reported as very high, somewhere between 70 and 73%.
Wow, that's a huge chunk held by big firms.
It is, and many are specialized healthcare or biotech funds. Names like Cormorant Asset Management, Janus Henderson, RA Capital are mentioned. Having these sophisticated investors on board often provides some validation.
Did the report mention any major changes?
It noted that .72 Asset Management had reduced its position, but overall, it's a high concentration among institutions.
What about insiders, management and board?
Also quite significant, reported between 22 and 24%, including options and warrants. CEO Ian McDonald has a particularly large stake.
Any recent insider buying or selling?
The report notes net purchases recently, mainly because insiders participated in that private placement. There were some smaller sales by others, but the overall trend was buying via the placement. High insider ownership generally aligns their interests with other shareholders.
So with institutions holding 70% and insiders 24%, that doesn't leave much for the public, does it?
Exactly. It results in a small public float, the shares readily available for trading by individual investors.
And the implication of that small float is?
Increased volatility. Even smaller trades by those big holders can move the price significantly because there just aren't that many shares changing hands freely. Retail investors might see sharp swings.
Does that high institutional ownership affect governance?
It often does. Big institutions tend to scrutinize management and governance practices more closely. It likely played a part in Bright Minds addressing those NASDAQ Q notices we mentioned earlier. The Experience Board also helps on the governance front.
The report had a table on ownership.
Yes. Table 3 visually confirms that concentration institutions and insiders dominate. Small public float. That's a key characteristic here.
Okay. What about short interest in options? Any clues there?
Short interest itself is reported as moderate, around 4% of the float. Not crazy high.
Right.
But the cost to borrow shares to short is exceptionally high, 33 to 34% borrow fee rate reported. That's steep.
Wow. And are shares easy to find to borrow?
Apparently not. Limited availability, maybe 45,000 shares available, and it fluctuates. Days to cover is around 3-4 days.
So not many shorting, but those who pay a high price and shares are scarce.
Exactly. Suggests strong conviction among the shorts, despite the cost, and difficulty finding shares to borrow, likely because the long-term institutions aren't lending theirs out.
What about options activity? Anything unusual?
The report's sources seem limited on current specific options data for DRUC things like volume spikes, open interest shifts, put-call ratios. Generally, that data can indicate sentiment, but nothing prominent was highlighted here.
So high institutional ownership is a double-edged sword again. Validation, but risk if they sell.
Precisely. If a big fund sells for portfolio reasons not even related to Bright Minds fundamentals, it could hit the stock hard because of that thin float.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's tackle Chapter 6. Risk assessment using a SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats.
Right. We've covered a lot of this. Strengths. Innovative pipeline, BMB 101, clinical progress, experienced leadership, especially recent hires, institutional backing, the financial runway post-financing, their IP.
Weaknesses.
Pre-revenue status, burning cash, huge clinical risk, trials can fail, limited operating history, stock volatility, reliance on some licensed IP. Pretty standard for biotech.
Opportunities.
Addressing large markets with unmet needs, epilepsy, depression, that huge potential catalyst with the mid-2025 phase 2 data, potential partnerships, advancing the rest of the pipeline, BMB 201, 202.
And threats. The big worry.
Clinical trial failure is number one. Intense competition, regulatory setbacks, future financing needs and dilution, IP challenges, bad market conditions for biotech overall, and U.S. tariffs.
Right, the tariffs. That seemed a bit unusual for a drug developer. Explain that risk again.
Yeah, it's becoming more relevant. The U.S. put broad tariffs on goods in early 2025. While finished drugs got some initial exemptions from the highest reciprocal rates, a baseline 10% was still a concern, plus potential impact on components.
But the bigger threat is future pharma-specific tariffs.
Exactly. The administration stated intentions for direct pharma tariffs and even launched a national security investigation into pharma imports, drugs, APIs, starting materials just this month, April 2025.
So how does that hit a company like Bright Minds?
They rely on global supply chains for raw materials, chemical intermediates, APIs often from places like China or India. Tariffs on these inputs mean higher R&D costs, higher future manufacturing costs.
Squeezing their already tight cash.
Yes, plus potential supply chain disruptions, delays. If they ever get to commercialize, tariffs on finished drugs would hit manufacturing costs and pricing. Smaller biotechs have fewer options to mitigate this than big pharma.
And the uncertainty itself is a problem.
Definitely. Planning becomes much harder. Supplier choices, manufacturing contracts, clinical trial logistics. They might need bigger cash reserves, adjust timelines. It adds another layer of complexity and risk.
A significant external factor to watch. Okay, let's bring it all together. Chapter 7. Brief conclusion. What's the final take?
Well, the report paints a clear picture. Bright Minds is a classic high-risk, high-reward clinical stage biotech play.
The potential comes from.
Their novel serotonin platform, particularly the lead drug BMB 101. That upcoming phase 2 data is absolutely critical. Plus, the strength in management and solid institutional backing are positives.
And the risks.
Also significant: clinical failure, tough competition, the constant need for funding and dilution, and now these potential tariff headwinds. The valuation is all forward-looking, highly speculative.
So, a final thought for our listeners. Is the potential payoff addressing these major unmet needs in brain disorders worth the substantial risk and volatility we see here, especially with these added uncertainties like tariffs looming?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? And that near-term verdict, the ultimate indicator for Bright Minds' immediate future, really rests on those mid-2025 results from the BMB 101 phase 2 breakthrough trial. That data will be pivotal.
Absolutely pivotal. If you found this deep dive useful and want more analysis like this, definitely subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel. We dig into companies like this regularly.
And just the necessary disclaimer here.
Right. This discussion was for informational purposes only, based entirely on that April 18th, 2025 Bright Minds Biosciences Deep Research Report. It is not financial or investment advice.
Investing in biotech carries significant risk. You could lose your investment.
Please also note that artificial intelligence was used in the analysis process for the underlying research report. You can find links to the report and other sources in the description below.